not doing last week's. It was a bit of a mess because I didn't really have a computer to edit with, so I've just basically put 2 weeks worth of stuff into one video, which is going to be a bit longer. Sorry. Okay, so on to the news. First news story kind of thing is David Cameron, and he's claimed that we are well on our way to a deal. It's a direct quote, with the EU. He said that the vote is now to come in summer 2016 rather than 2017, which many people, including Tory MPs and UKIP MP, the one, have said that that's what they're going to do, because otherwise they'll be caught up in the mess of the Euroscepticism in the Tory party, which is causing a massive conflict at the moment. Well, we see the civil war in the Labour Party at the moment, the people against Corbyns and against the Corbynites. However, we aren't really seeing the rebellions in the Tory party, which are real, they are happening. It's just we don't see them as much because the Tories have this kind of propaganda thing that they're very good at, because that's the kind of people they come from. They're the upper class, which are used to being propagandist. So yeah, he's going to do that before the next, well, a long time before the next election, so at least he has, 2 years in where he's got peace and quiet, because if he does it in 2016, then it's going to be 2017, 2018, 2019 will be the year they're choosing a new leader, at latest, for the Tory party, and then he'll be kicked out in the same year, and so that year will still be a bit of a mess. But still, that's the best he can hope for, because he was the one to set his own hat alight, really, by saying that he's going to resign after 2 terms, which means really he's going to resign before 2 terms, but that's the best you can say to people in an election, can't you? So in wake of terror attacks, Cameron has been trying to sneak through a repeal of the Freedom of Information Act, which basically allowed, well, what was already happening, which was that civil servants were rebelling and giving out information about Tory MPs and Labour MP, well, all MPs in its entirety. It's just Tory MPs happen to have worse things going on, especially with the the expenses crisis, which happened, well, the expenditure crisis, I guess. Whatever. Who cares about names of things? It's just the whole, well, parliamentarian crisis in which loads of MPs were claiming far too many expenses and spending them on things like giant mansions for ducks. But, you know. So yeah, Tom Watson, Deputy Leader of Labour, has said he is governing from the gloom, which, I mean, it's referring to the whole, there's been a terror attack, you're trying to get things through on this idea of protection, when it's not really protection. You're trying to repeal rights in the name of protection, just as George W. Bush and Dick Cheney did after the 9/11 attacks, in the creation of the Homeland Security Department, and also in the creation of the NSA, which is now under massive scrutiny. That was a lot to say. But yeah, Tom Watson was probably the majority of the people who support Labour in its entirety, not just like an ideological support, but Labour as a party. They wanted Tom Watson to become the next leader because people like Ball had gone, and Ball was the obvious choice for the next leader. However, Tom Watson was the obvious choice after that because he's strong-willed, and he's also a nice person. He's not like a shitty guy like Tony Blair was and some of the people before him. He's also been attempting to repeal the benefits from EU immigrants and asylum seekers, leading to EU officials telling him off for discriminating against EU immigrants. However, he's responded basically that it's still going to happen, and the direct quote of that is that it remains on the table. I mean, really, it's just the same thing that everybody else says, but you know. The Cumbrian floods is another part of this story because there has been a Tory spin on the events. It's a very sad time for people in Cumbria, in which there have been masses of floods. The floodgates didn't work, and they've been said to have worked. That's what the Tories have said, that they did work. That was the spin on the events, but they didn't. The thing that they were saying is they weren't breached, they weren't destroyed in the process of getting over them. I mean, it depends what you think as working, but they weren't destroyed, however, they did not work. 3 years ago, improvements were proposed by the coalition government. These improvements have been said by some experts to have been able to repair it, to make it so that these floods never happened. However, by other experts, it's been said that nothing could have stopped the floods, and they were inevitable. But those experts are usually ones funded by Tories, so Again, probably part of the spin on the events. Douglas Carswell, yes, MP for UKIP, says that UKIP needs a fresh face instead of Farage. And in response, Farage has told him to put up or shut up. It's kind of a disgusting event because, well, UKIP have been under massive debt at the moment. They've lost £300,000 because of the fact they only got one MP, as they already had before the general election, while still having so many votes. People were expecting them to get a hell of a lot more MPs. People were expecting it to move more like SNP got a few. They got about as many as SNP, not in Scotland, obviously, but in the country in its entirety, especially on marginal seats, where they have recently lost in the by-election after Michael Meach's death. They lost by quite a bit. They gained a few votes, but Labour gained a hell of a lot more votes, and because it was a by-election, there were less people showing up, and the people who showed up were more UKIP because they were told to. But yeah. Oh. It is winter, so people are sick. Don't worry about that. Javad Zarif, foreign minister, tells the US and UK to join in a concerted effort against Daesh. He is the foreign minister for Iran, and well, there's this concerted effort that has been proposed by the UN for quite a while now, and they've been saying join us in it, and we've beaten enemies in the past, so it might cause a bit of trouble. However, Cuba is a place where the US have been showing themselves to be a lot better with previous enemies. So hopefully maybe Obama can be as nice as he was with Cuba and just sort out the mess with the Iran and most of the Middle East, to be honest. Well, the Near East and Middle East, especially the Levant. Yemen talks are being derailed by Yemeni and Saudi armed forces taking the rebel towns. This is quite disturbing because these peace talks were happening where the uprising was meant to be stopped by the peace talks. There was meant to be some kind of settlement. However, during the settlement, Saudi Arabia, sponsored by Yemen, have sent forces across the border to attack the towns that the rebels have taken. It's disgusting that they can just kind of... It's a propaganda drive. They're trying to goad them into it. It's the kind of thing you'd see in medieval history, not fucking modern history, but you know. What's civilization if not a bunch of medieval idiocy hidden by colours, really? Money and media, I suppose. The Ukraine has refused to pay a Russian bond of $3 billion, which they supposedly owed Russia. This might cause a bit of tension because Russia are now occupying the Ukraine. They have been for quite a while, and that's been causing tension with the US. But who knows, maybe it'll go well, maybe it'll go fine. I mean, Russia seems to be alright with a lot of things. The only reason they really seem to invade Ukraine is because of defence against the US, and yeah, they are a terrible country, but at least they aren't just doing things as the Union did, just trying to conquer. So maybe they'll be alright with it, but who knows. Paris environmentalism talks called the COP21, which happened, well, after the talks previously this year, I think. And countries have now been limited to 250 Kelvin, or 2 Celsius, 335.5 Fahrenheit, and 274.5 Kelvin is the goal, which is also 15 degrees Celsius and 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Current emissions, however, are at 276 Kelvin with 3 degrees centigrade and 37.5 degrees Fahrenheit, so the reductions are nowhere near enough. But there has been more wide adoption since the Copenhagen talks, which kind of fell apart, such as in Oslo and Paris, where they've been, well, plans to go environmental, as I've said, but yeah, they've said that they're not going to have any fossil fuels within like the next 5 years, so that's pretty good. Like in the main cities of France and of Sweden. Sweden has the whole fossil-free Sweden plan, which is quite good as well. So yeah, maybe it's more akin to propaganda. I mean, no Plan B was printed on the Eiffel Tower. Hopefully it's not just some kind of drive to stop Greens and people from gaining votes because somebody is thinking, oh yeah, it's fine, we're doing stuff about it, but we aren't really doing anywhere near enough. But it does seem to help because of the fact that countries are actually doing things aside from these talks. So maybe it will help. The next major story is Donald Trump. Trump has been saying that he will stop immigration of all Muslims if he becomes president. This is a massive thing that probably everybody has heard of, and also probably everyone has heard of the fact that Josh Earnest says it disqualified him from the presidency. Josh Earnest is the leader of EXOP, the West Wing White House thing. He's the press secretary kind of guy. He's basically the president whilst Obama's going golfing, really. But basically, it's referring to him losing votes and public opinion, rather than a legally binding disqualification. He's also stated that London was full of extremism and that police are afraid. Boris Johnson, the mayor of London, and soon to not be because he has to step down in the next election, has called it complete and utter nonsense. Well, of course it is, but Boris Johnson is the kind of guy who you'd expect to agree with Donald Trump, so really it's just showing how stupid Donald is being. Although he is stupid, as shown by a few recent news stories coming out about him from past papers in People's Magazine around 98. He posted something saying, if I was to run as president, I'd run as a Republican because the Republican voters are the stupidest, and therefore I could probably win with them. And he's also said to, in a Playboy magazine interview, being just a massive idiot. All he really cared about was what came to him. It was a reactionary response rather than thought through. So yeah. Anyway, yeah. He's also suggested going independent because of the fact that the Republicans have been going against him on a lot of things. 68% of his supporters will still vote for him. However, that means that it means that 32% will not vote for him. And 32% is quite a lot, just in case you haven't noticed, of his supporters, his supposed supporters, will not vote for him. I mean, really, it would cause a massive fracture in the Republican Party because they couldn't win. There'd be no way that the Republicans could win if around half of them are going to Trump and the rest of them are staying with the Republicans, because that would make a massive rupture in the vote. I'm sorry, but it doesn't matter how big the amount of support for the Republicans has become after Obama, although it doesn't really seem to have been that big anyway. It would cause the Democrats to win with whatever candidate they put out there. But Jeremy Corbyn has attended the Stop the War event against the wishes of the Blairites, which is, they've been criticising the closeness of the Stop the War to things like Putin and Assad when it comes to policy, because they've been saying, oh, if you keep the instated dictator, then there'd probably be more peace, such as when America instated Saddam Hussein and then took him out a few years later and caused massive disruption in that area. However, Putin and Assad are focusing on the Free Syrian Army, which are the strongest ground forces and therefore preoccupied. The only forces that are making any difference at all is the Kurds, and the Kurds are all ground forces, but they're a lot smaller than the Free Syrian Army, who are currently fighting Assad. So really, this kind of peace between Assad and the Free Syrian Army could actually help bring a close to ISIS ISIS. So yeah, the Tories are making deals as well, as part of the Syrian war, with Putin, Assad and the Saudis, and it's just been more and more stuff going on that's a bit weird. There's no real opposition to the mandate of Jeremy Corbyn, but they just seem to come out with the weirdest things over and over again. Okay, on to the next section. This one's slightly sad. Well, slightly. 600 people have been evacuated from the Cumbrian floods. This is bad because, some of them have been leaving things in the houses that are necessary for their survival. Obviously, it's not as big as some of the other emergencies. However, it still is massive. 600 people in the north of England just completely displaced. 12 insurgents and 5 military officers were killed in attacks in Burundi after a failed coup in May. 4 policemen and 2 Spaniards were killed in a Taliban siege of Kabul, and rebels who have died in Herat, Yemen, during the peace talk. So for hope, we've got a new scientific thing called Narcan. It's a nasal spray and will be available in January. It could save thousands as treatments for overdosing because it can, it basically stops the overdosing, wakes you up. And overdosing, the main problem with that is when you overdose, you could actually choke on your own vomit and stuff like that. I've seen in some pretty popular TV shows, actually. But, drugs are always romanticised in TV shows. Egalitarianism. For this, I've been splitting this up a bit. Egalitarianism means equality, basically. So Pope Francis has said that all those who have aborted are forgiven. That's egalitarian because, women are the ones who are going to have aborted, and therefore having the choice of abortion leaves them to have choice over their own body, have will over what their body does and what can be done to it. New Zealand have embraced their national identity with a new flag, which means the reduction of imperialism, and that's egalitarian because obviously the British Empire used to think they were the best and nobody else was good. So removing the British crest, the Union flag as it is, from the corner of their flag allows them to be their own nation, be their... just kind of repeal the idea of them still being a colonial nation. Saudi Arabian women are massing for the vote with around 980 female candidates, 130,000 registered female voters. However, this is lackluster against the amount of men who are voting and are in the candidacy, but at least it's better than nothing. It's rising, which is always a good thing. Supreme Court has ruled against the Roberts Common pro-Second Amendment stance with 7-2, allowing the banning of heavy assault rifles. Which is good, because that's what people actually want. That's what 70% of Americans actually want. They want control, they don't want banning. Environmentalism, the Murdoch sucker, which is a tiny fish that basically lives in lakes, has been swimming off the endangered list quite rapidly. Chinese demand for ivory has dried up, leaving 50% of the price completely slashed. And this means that, it's unlikely that hunters will want to go out that much and kill elephants, which is a very, very good thing. Old L&D landfill near East Hampton, Lumberton, and Mount Holly in New Jersey is being refitted as solar energy site able to power 2,000 homes a year. People have been saying, very few people, it's been completely romanticised by the news reporter who reported it. Do not take this as people actually thinking this way. It's just a very small thing that's been recently popularised by a news report. They think that the solar panels will take the energy from the sun and therefore plants will not have energy, but that's not exactly how it works, and even if it was, there'd be way enough energy for the sun to be able to give life to the majority of plants anyway. All of plants, especially with the human activity killing the rest off. So yeah, it doesn't matter if we had the entire Earth covered with solar panels that somehow could still let the sun through past them, because obviously they would be blocking it, they would be creating shadows beneath them where the sunlight doesn't exactly get to, but if you could have them the opposite of reflective, more like translucent at worst, so that you could still get some rays to the plants. If you did that, then they'd still live, they'd still be alive, there'd still be the majority of plants that there are on Earth today. So, it's just stupid, really. That's what I'm saying. Altruism. Ringo Starr has donated $9.2 billion in mass sale of all of his property, including his drum kit, to the Lotus Foundation, which he created with his wife. 4,114 homeless veterans have been rehoused in Houston with the Way Home, which is like a program that's been used to rehouse veterans, basically. American Muslims have raised $102,000 for San Bernardino victims and their families, which is good because it shows that Muslims are not the cause of the problems. They aren't. They really aren't. Abdul Halim Al-Attar has he started out selling pens, and now he owns 4 businesses and he employs Syrian refugees like himself, which is good because, where else are they going to get a job, really? They're going to be completely alienated by the locals, in most nations at least, not in places like Germany, which seem to have done quite a good job of allowing people in, except from in the case of Afghanis for some reason. Vietnamese ex-migrants from the Vietnam War donate to Syrian refugees with the moniker "We Never Forget," which is quite good as well. Okay,